Work makes the dream work. Okay. Thank you all for bearing with us. Hi, Shaul. It's great to see you in a way that's not frozen. I hope we can keep you for the next hour. We're so excited, and I'm so grateful that you're joining us. And we've had such unbelievable enthusiasm for this program. So really looking forward to the conversation. In the interest of time and kind of making up the lost time here, I'm going to really zip through an introduction of my friend Shaul. It's been so wonderful getting to know him and learning from him and getting to work together on some things that we're going to talk about tonight. And so I just want to quickly tell you that Shaul Rahabi is Golda Meir's grandson and chair of the Golda Meir Institute for Leadership. His career spans experience in interior design, architecture, international politics and strategy, and journalism. So a diverse career path. We are speaking to Shaul, as you all know, on the occasion of the release of the new movie Golda, featuring award-winning actors Helen Mirren and Liev Schreiber, which premiered at the end of August. And I'm assuming that many of the people who are joining us today have seen it already. If you haven't seen it, you absolutely have to go see it. We'll love to hear your feedback. We're definitely gonna be talking about the film tonight. I don't think there's any spoilers because I think we all know how it ends, but sorry if we ruin anything for you. And it's really just an extra privilege to be able to have this conversation with Shaul, because as the founder of Zioness, an organization founded on the principles that Golda advocated for her whole life, you know, we marketed this as a conversation with Zioness about the Lioness, and she has always been in my mind as the leader of this movement and organization, because as we all know, Golda was a Zionist in every part of her, you know, every bone in her body. And she also was a passionate advocate for progressive issues, progressive values, and progressive policies throughout her life, and certainly in her leadership and her trailblazing leadership as the first woman prime minister for the state of Israel. So if you haven't already, again, we really encourage you to go see the film, learn more about an important moment in Israeli history, the Yom Kippur War and its aftermath, and help us make sure that we are protecting and advancing Golda's legacy. So Shaul, thank you again. It's amazing to see you and to have you.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be with you. And I hope I meet your expectations.
Shaul's a little nervous. He doesn't do a lot of public speaking. So everyone just make sure you're applauding in the Q&A in the chat and telling him how grateful you are to learn with him today.
So, yeah.
So first, Shaul, sorry?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so first, I want to mention your role as the founder and the chair of the Golda Meir Leadership Institute, which I've been really privileged to learn about from you and work with you on a little bit. And I know that advancing and protecting Golda's legacy has been a passion of yours as her grandson your whole life, and has really driven a lot of the work that you've done in your life. So tell us a bit about the Institute, the work it does, your vision for it in the future, and of course, how people can support it, but I'll bring that up again.
Okay, sure. We established this this institute, which is a nonprofit, like 6 or 7 years ago, and we thought that Golda had such a major part in establishing Israel, the state of Israel, even before the state of Israel was independent. But she had an extraordinary impact on the establishment of the state, as a labor minister in the 50s, and then as foreign minister for 10 years in the late 50s and 60s, and then as a prime minister. And we thought her life achievements should be commemorated for younger generations to know their history, to know where they're coming from. So that's what we're trying to do. We're a very small organization and not very rich, to say the least. And that's what we're doing. We have a very extensive and rich website where you can find a lot of information, but mostly in Hebrew. We hope to have more in English and other languages in the future. We have of course, a Facebook page, which is also very active. And we are publishing new documents and new articles about her achievements in various activities and various periods of her life. We supported the publication of an important book that came out last year about her government and the Yom Kippur War, which sheds lights on her really heroic leadership during the war and also before the war. And and also we are now incorporated into our organization and a project which it's called Forum 31. You know that we have a municipal elections next this October. Like in 2 months we'll have municipal regional elections in Israel. So we are supporting this Forum 31, which its aim is to promote women leadership and to promote candidates, female candidates, as many as possible. So that's what we're doing, and we hope to continue even after the elections, creating this Institute for Leadership, mainly for women, for female activists in various areas of politics, society, and so on and so forth. And that's mainly what we're doing. As I said, we're a small organization. Everything is done voluntarily. We will also have a mini conference this coming October, where we will show the movie and also discuss the war. Each year we have this project of the Prime Minister Golda Meir Prize, which we award each year to people or organizations that promote her legacy or wrote something about her, a book, an article, a research. So we will also award this year's prize to the 3 authors of this book, which I just told you about. That's about it. And we also, now with the help of Amanda and other good people, we're trying to establish a Friends of Golda Meir Institute in the States, and we hope it will come to life someday in the near future. But
we will be reaching out to the people on the Zoom who want to help support the Friends of the Golda Meir Leadership Institute in the United States, because it's such a critical project, and of course because Golda's legacy matters very deeply to us as American Jews and as diaspora Jews. So you already said so many things that are leading me to want to ask other questions other than the order that I want to go in. I'm gonna hold back and stay, on track for just a bit. I might get distracted here with the questions. I want to just start by asking the question I think so many people have. How was it? How is it to be Golda's grandson? I mean, are there favorite stories or anecdotes that you can share? And, I do want to add the context, and I'm going to ask this, even though it's a bit sensitive, that I think there's a perception that Golda was cold and, unfeeling, and that she wasn't such a family woman, especially in the height of her leadership. I know that's not how you perceive her. So share with us a little bit about your experience as her grandson.
No, of course not. I had a great experience. I had a grandson of Golda. She was very caring and loving to her grandchildren. I think my mother and maybe my uncle suffered more than we had when they were young children, because she, for long periods, she was out of the country and very active in politics. But they were at least my mother was very identified with the mission of my grandmother, so she could easily bear it, and she never complained. My mother, I don't remember hearing her complain about being my grandmother being out of the country, or out working for long days out of home. But we, as grandchildren, we only enjoyed her presence always. And when we visited, you know that, Amanda, I'm sure you know, but I grew up in a kibbutz in the Negev desert. And my grandmother was in Jerusalem or in Tel Aviv. So we met her, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 times a year during holidays, when she used to come, or Rosh Hashanah, or Pesach, Passover, she used to come, and we visited her, and it was also always a great experience, and she was loving and caring, and it was wonderful. I was attracted to her politics from a very young age, and was also identified with her mission and with her politics. And I think I got a political education very early on.
Right.
Remember,
Sure.
yeah. So our discussions around the kitchen table was always politics.
Right.
So I absorbed a lot of politics from an early age, and my awareness, or political awareness, or social awareness, was really from a very young age.
Right. Sure. Okay, so let's turn to the film. It's in theaters now, a wide release in August. I know you were at the Jerusalem Film Festival with Helen Mirren, and that you and your family played a role, early on in the, I don't know about the production, but the development of the film. So how do you feel about it? And how was it to participate in the conversations before the film was made?
Okay, so actually the screenwriter of the movie, a Brit called Nicholas Martin, is not Jewish, but somehow he was attracted to the story of my grandmother, of a woman, old woman, leading the war, or leading the war cabinet in Israel. And he came here, like, I think 2016, and we met. And I told him, as long as you tell the truth, then I'm all for it. And he did his own research, very extensive research. And finally, it came about. I mean, and they were able to bring in Guy Nativ as a director, and of course Helen Mirren. And she was great. I thought she was great. She did her role fantastically. She really was able to portray my grandmother in a very authentic way. I'm not sure about the artistic qualities of the movie, but that's not for me to judge. But in terms of the story of the movie, I think it does justice with my grandmother, and it really tells the real story. And what's more important for me is to see the link between the end of the war, how it's ended, and the peace process that came about, and the peace agreement that was signed in 1979. So that was very important. That sets the scores with her critics, or with some of them. So I thought that was a very good presentation of history, actually.
So it's so interesting because, as you know, and probably a lot of people on the Zoom know, but maybe not everyone, there is a different perception of Golda in Israel versus in the diaspora. And I think there's much more criticism of her in Israel. In the diaspora, we think of her as a trailblazing female leader. We're so proud that a Jewish woman, was one of the first female heads of state ever, and knowing especially her progressive legacy and the things she advocated for, and that she was actually able to achieve. I think in Israel, given the death toll, frankly, in the Yom Kippur War, there have been questions about some of the choices that were made. And my perception of the film is that it does kind of clear her name, and it does, given that the research that was recently produced or declassified, there is more information about what actually happened, and not that it's about like blaming Moshe Dayan or anyone for that matter, but she took the fall for a lot of things that happened in Yom Kippur, and she doesn't get the credit for a lot of things that came from decisions that she made. It seems like Menachem Begin really gets more of the credit for the peace that was established after the war. So, how do you tell us?
No, I mean, you're right. I mean, Begin deserves his credit for the peace agreement, but it was a process that began right after the war with the agreement of separation of forces, or the disengagement treaty, which was signed in January with Egypt in January of 1974, right after the war. And with Syria, I think it took a little longer. But that was the start of the peace process, okay? And also, Anwar Sadat, Egypt's president, when he sent a condolences letter to Israeli president at the time, Yitzhak Navon, after she died, and he credits her with the beginning of the peace process. So that was a process, and if you really look at the war, if you want to discuss the war, or if you want me to give a broader perspective, historical perspective of the war, when you look at it from a 50-year perspective. So I think it was really a watershed event in Israeli history, because it ended a period that lasted for 25 years. Somebody called it lately the 25-year war, from 48 to 73, 25 years. But Israel was encircled by Arab countries that wanted to I don't know, we used to think that they wanted to eliminate Israel, to send us all to the sea or whatever. But I think it has a true ring to it. I mean, so for 25 years, we fought the war of survival. And the Yom Kippur War just ended this period and opened another era where Israel was trying to assimilate in the region. And Egypt allowed Israel and recognized Israel for the first time, first Arab country. That was the bravery of Anwar Sadat.
Absolutely. So there's a question in the chat that really relates. There are a lot of questions in the chat that relate to the questions that we will get to for sure. One of the things that I thought was such an important message from the film is about Israel's vulnerability. I think we live in a world today where people think Israel is this incredibly powerful, and in many ways it is. I'm not denying that, but it depends who you're comparing it to, of course. And so I think being able to see that, in the film, when Golda says we're fighting for our existence, it's 48 all over again, I think it's a reminder to audiences who are watching it today that Israel isn't what we think it is. That, in many ways, again, it is, but in many ways it's not. Israel is a small state surrounded by countries that, whether it's a cold peace or a more complicated relationship, has not historically felt safe in the world. And so, the question that I think is great in the chat is whether your grandmother ever conveyed to you the feelings of vulnerability that I think come out in the film really beautiful, like during her leadership, or, of Israel's vulnerability more broadly.
Yes, I think, again, I think up until 73, it was very vulnerable. And my grandmother was really, I don't know how to say it, but she was really apprehensive of this vulnerability, and was also, she had her own traumas of, I'm not speaking about, pogroms in Ukraine and the Holocaust and the Sinai, the Suez War in 56 and 57. And so Israel was very vulnerable up until 73, but as I said, and that's what I think, that the war ended this period of being encircled by Arab countries who do not recognize the Israel or the right of Israel to exist even. But this war opened the way for Egypt to leave the Arab League, and conclude a separate peace agreement with Israel, which up until then they were all acting together, and they demanded that Israel they wanted to impose a treaty on Israel that it will evacuate all the territories that it's occupied during the Six-Day War in 1967. But after the war, Sadat, with his initial success in the war, he felt that he's strong enough to leave the Arab line, and deal with Israel separately, without other Arab countries, without Syria, without Jordan, and even without the Palestinians. Right. And that led the way to the peace agreement in 1979.
And there's
but it's also opened the way for Israel to be what it is today, a regional superpower, economically and militarily. That's what enabled Israel to prosper and to grow to what we know Israel to be today.
And there's such a moving scene in the film where Sadat does call it Israel instead of the Zionist entity, and of course we know that to be a real thing. And what a moment! I mean, I really had tears in my eyes in that moment. Totally game-changing historical moment that she orchestrated, and very strategically.
Exactly, yeah.
So you mentioned Ukraine and her trauma, which does also come out in the film, and there are some famous quotes that, many of the lines in the film that I loved, and we'll talk about one of them a bit later, are things that, anyone who loves Golda has heard these quotes before. And so, to see them played by someone who, as Barbara said in the chat, it was almost like, Helen Mirren was so perfectly cast that it was almost like you were really listening to Golda. You had to remind yourself that it wasn't really her. And especially hearing quotes that have been attributed to her that you've heard so many times in your life was so amazing. Anyway, she talks about her experience in Ukraine and the pogroms that she experienced, and the way that her father had to protect the children from people on Christmas rioting and violently attacking Jews. And interestingly, the screening that I went to, Guy Nativ, the producer, did a talk back, and he mentioned how actually Ukrainian President Zelensky has said that Golda was his inspiration, or is his inspiration. And he spoke historically about the fact that during 73, the Russians were providing the weapons to the Arabs and America was providing weapons to Israel. And so he really sees historical parallels. And of course, as a well-known Jewish person himself, I think it's just unbelievably inspiring to think about him, looking to Golda for leadership and inspiration in such an moment for himself. So, I was just curious, like, how you think about that, and given the events, of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and whether you feel that that it's a I guess it is an important parallel. Whether actually the question really I wanted to ask you is whether you have heard of people trying to compare Ukraine to the Palestinians and kind of flip the power dynamic and the debate that that is being had about the war. because we've heard it here in the US. I wonder if you're hearing that at all. And so I think it's so fascinating for President Zelensky to talk about Golda having been his inspiration.
Well, I think there is a parallel between the two historical situations where Israel was fighting the Arabs and the Soviets, and now Zelensky is being Ukraine is being attacked by this monster, murderous dictator, and so I think they have the right to to identify with Golda and with her courage and with our strong belief in her in the Zionist project, and they have the right to believe in their own right to exist as a Western independent state. And I'm very critical of the Israeli policy towards Ukraine in the last 2 years. I think Prime Minister Naftali Bennett was mistaken in actually taking a no commitment policy towards either side, like being neutral in this conflict. And I think that was a big mistake. I know why they, not only Bennett, but also Lapid. Lapid was better in that sense, the Yair Lapid, which came after him. And Netanyahu, again, he just had a very tense conversation today with Zelensky. And I know that the Ukrainians are very frustrated about Israeli policy, although they love Israel as an idea, but they're very frustrated with Israeli policy, with the Israeli government, and that's to me that's a shame. I know that the Israeli leaders they have all kind of calculations about we have Russian presence in Syria, military presence in Syria, so they have these calculations which for me don't make sense at all. I think Israel should support Ukraine as strong as it can. I mean, with providing air defense systems and whatever. I thought it was a big mistake, not being more supportive of Ukraine and not being part of the American-led coalition. Actually, that's a kind of a betrayal of our own principles, and but not the way it is.
Yeah, it's a complicated subject,
complicated.
for sure. I guess bringing it back to your grandmother and not specifically how she would handle this situation, especially given the risks. And, I've heard in conversations about the possibility of sending Iron Dome, for example, that God forbid Iron Dome were in the hands of the Russians, the Iranians would have it immediately, and the threat to Israeli civilians would be so extreme. But putting aside, I have no idea what Israel should do on that.
Okay, good.
This front. Golda's legacy was really about opening doors for Israel with the world, and she spent time in Africa, and she really worked so hard to build diplomatic relations, and she traveled the world spreading progressive values and ideals. She pursued progressive policies in Israel and abroad. And you've told me some fascinating stories about her relationship with the AFL-CIO, with the Carpenters Union. She was the VP of Socialist International and very closely connected with European socialist labor unions. And of course, as a well-known Labor Party leader, We know that she advocated for maternity leave, for labor. She really advocated very hard for labor rights in Israel, and for a welfare state, for Social Security and workers' rights. So let's talk a bit about her progressive legacy. And I know it inspires you. Tell us, maybe a story or two about how she was received when she was traveling the world, advancing both her Zionism, as she did in Africa, and also fighting for advancement in Africa, and then toward her progressive policies in the Western world.
Yeah. Okay. Now she was a socialist all her life. I know it's in the States it has not a very positive connotation to the word
People don't know what it is. People don't know what it is. I mean, if you believe
but
here in workers' rights, you could call
right.
yourself a socialist, or you could just say you care about, progressive policies that are protecting people.
Right.
Sorry.
So she was a socialist all her life. I think she joined the Palei Zion movement when she was very young in the States, already in Milwaukee. Actually, she met Ben Gurion and Yitzhak Ben Tzvi, which was the second president of Israel later on. They came to the States, I don't know, in 1917 or something like that. And they came to Milwaukee, and there she met them for the first time. She was very young. And I think they stayed at her house, at her parents' house at that time. So that was when she was attracted to the socialist Zionist movement, and first to the Palei Zion party. And then when she immigrated to Israel, she joined Mapai, the Labor Party at the time, okay, and was very active in the trade unions in Israel, in the Histadrut. Was very active, was one of the leaders of the Histadrut at the time during the 30s and 40s. And when Ben Gurion established his first government in 49, he called her from Moscow. She was then the ambassador, the first ambassador to the Soviet Union. From 48, she went to Moscow, and that's another very beautiful story about her relation with Soviet Jewry there, and but that's another story. But when Ben Gurion established his first government in January 49, he called her from Moscow to be Minister of Labor in his government, his first government. He thought that he must have a woman in his government, and so he called her. So she came back from Moscow and was a Minister of Labor for 7 years, which she described as her best 7 years. And she did fantastic, amazing projects, first in absorbing newcomers, Aliyah. You know that Israeli population was doubling itself in 3 years. It absorbed like 600,000 new Olim from Arab countries, from Iraq and from Yemen, but also from Europe after the war. So that was amazing and a major project just to house everybody, okay? And nobody was left without a roof over his head, even for one night. So that was her project, not alone, but she led this project of building new housing for new Olim, for new immigrants. And another project is all the social legislature that she passed through the Knesset, labor laws, and also the Social Security law, which is very, very important in the framework of the welfare states. So that was her mission, and she loved it. And when she was, and then in '56, Ben-Gurion fired his foreign minister, Moshe Sharet, and asked her to take his place. And she had nothing to do with diplomacy and with, protocol. And but she had a lot of experience abroad. Mainly, I think she came to the States every year, at least once, to raise money. So when she was brought into the Foreign Office, she brought her socialist ideas with her and thought it's a mission of the new states to help other newly born states in Africa. And that's what she did. She sent many advisors to many countries in Africa and opened like 32 embassies in Africa. Now we have like 9 or 10 embassies in Africa. Then in the 60s, we have 32. And you know that I just told somebody that even today, you find girls, African girls, called after her, Golda Meir. So that was another project that she led in Africa, bringing her experience in bringing the social Zionism to Africa. Actually, that was building hospitals, building farms. And also she was the first to open here in Israel every year, and it still exists, an institute that let me find the words, but each year we bring in mainly women from third world countries, from Africa, but also from Asia and from Latin America, for various classes or courses in development, in agriculture, in medicine, in all kind of development areas. Foreign Office. This Carmel Institute in Haifa, that was her project. She established this institute, and it's a beautiful project. So that was also a main achievement of her. She has also, as you mentioned, she was very active in the Socialist International, and was, as Prime Minister, she was Vice President of the organization, and had a very good relations with many mainly European socialist parties. During the 70s, many of them were leading the countries, like in Scandinavia, in Denmark, in Sweden, in Holland, in Britain, okay, not in France, but in Germany. Willy Brandt was a very important figure then, Nobel Peace Prize laureate, very important figure in European politics, was a very good friend of her and very supportive of Israel. So yes, she was a socialist through and through.
And you told me a story recently about something of a standing ovation that she received in a progressive convention in Philadelphia. And it, the way you talked about it was really, talked about her aura, the way she's received when she walked into a room.
Yes. When she was first visiting as a prime minister, she visited the United States in September 1969. It was received at the White House by Nixon for a state visit. It was not just a working visit, but it was a state visit. You can see it. You can find it on YouTube. You'll see how she was received by Nixon, and it was very exciting. And after visiting the White House, she went to Philadelphia for the AFL-CIO convention. George Meany was then the president of the AFL-CIO, a very good friend of her. And it was a big, huge convention, at least in Israeli terms. I know Americans are used to it, but in Israeli terms, it was a huge convention hall. And with all the unions, raising their flags and their signs. And she was greeted to the stage and came to the stage and she said, "I'm looking for the Carpenters Union," because my father was a member of the Carpenters Union when he was in Milwaukee, and everybody was, she got a standing ovation. Everybody was so excited. That's what she had, a great way of capturing audiences, and she was her presence was she had a charisma, if you wish. And
Yeah,
so that was a very exciting. I don't think you can find a video of this, but you can find pictures of her standing at the stage. It was a wonderful to see. I mean, that I wasn't there, but I heard from people who were there how amazing it was, and how excited was the audience, and how beautiful was the reception of her. She could could really capture the audience very well.
And obviously, even though you weren't there, you have a lot of experience with her charisma and with the way that she could command a room and the way that people admired her and wanted to, build things with her. And it's important to have these conversations because, again, she is perceived as being unemotional or almost detached. And it just doesn't sound, when I talk to you or when I read a biography, it doesn't, certainly not in Helen Mirren's performance. And I know how much Helen Mirren prepared for the performance to really kind of nail it with Golda. And she has these very warm moments. So, so it's nice to hear from you about the warmth that she projected and that was received by people who were in the same room with her, for sure. So let's talk about her Zionism for a minute. She was a very passionate Zionist, and we love that at Zioness, and I know you do too. And I'm just reading a thing from Jewish Unpacked on my next screen, where David Ben-Gurion talks about how, as the Zionist leaders were preparing to declare Israeli independence in 1948, they sent Golda, who had, as you mentioned, met Ben-Gurion in Milwaukee. They sent her to raise money for the state of Israel, and they hoped she would raise 7 million. She aimed to raise 25 million, and she returned with 50 million. Legend has it in a suitcase, according that's verbatim from Israel Unpacked, mostly in $1 and $5 bills. And Ben-Gurion famously is quoted as saying, "When the history of Israel is written one day, it will say there was a Jewish woman who got the money to make the state." So tell us a little bit about her Zionism.
So as I mentioned, she first met Zionism when she was very young in Milwaukee, and was very active in Poalei Zion in the States for a while, and then decided that she better go to Palestine. And she was able to convince her husband, he was not Zionist, my grandfather. He was more of a dreamer and an intellectual dreamer or something like that. He was very versed in poetry and in music and in literature. But somehow he probably loved her very much. So he joined her and other group of 20 or something to go to Palestine in 21. And they first came to the kibbutz. I mean, they first came to Tel Aviv after a horrifying journey, which is another story. how they, they sailed in the seas, and the boat was broken, and there was a mutiny on the ship, and yeah, it's a beautiful story, but that's for another time.
The time.
So they came to Palestine first, to Tel Aviv, and stayed for a while in Tel Aviv, and then she decided, if I'm a Zionist, I better go to a kibbutz in the north, in the Emek Israel. So they went to the kibbutz and stayed there for a while, for 2 years, not for very long, because my grandfather could not stand it. Working in the field, in the farm, or I don't know, but she loved it. She worked in the poultry farm. How do you say this? In the and also in the kitchen, but was already very active in politics, in the Histadrut, in the trade union politics, and was, as I mentioned, she was a socialist, and was a member of Mapai, very active in Mapai, and then in the Histadrut, and she thought that Zionism actually, and that came very clear to us from her. She thought that Israel should be Or LaGoyim. I don't know how you say it in Hebrew, but she would be an example to
A
the
light among the nations.
Light among the nations. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's what she thought. She thought, if you want to be I don't know, an oppressive country, or you don't need another oppressive country, or another I don't know, whatever. But if you want, if you establish a new state, a new country, it better be based on enlightened principles and ideals, and so that's what she thought, and that's what she worked for and fought for. And that leads me to say something about our days and our politics here in Israel. I think if she had been alive now in Israel, she would be horrified by what's going on here. I'm sorry, but
I'm not going to silence you.
No, but I think what's going on here in Israel, if you follow, it's really terrible what's going on. To have people supporting Rabbi Kahana in the government, that's terrible, and she would be horrified. But because, as I said, she fought for an Israel that would be light to the peoples of the world, and not to be an example of enlightenment, of justice, of peace. That's what she fought for. That's what her socialism and Zionism was. That's what her Zionism was, if I can, yeah.
I appreciate the comment, and I think it's important. And I know we're almost 5 o'clock Eastern, and it's almost midnight for Shaul. And I promise we're going to wrap up. I have 2 questions that I really want to ask. We did get started late. That's my excuse. And then there's a couple, depending on Shaul, you'll tell us when you're done. When you've had enough of this conversation, there's a couple great questions in the chat also. But I just want to reflect really quickly on what you're saying, because there is a perception of her in some progressive spaces, even though she was a trailblazing female leader, that she was hawkish because she presided over the Yom Kippur War, and because she was not shy about understanding the threats to Israel's vulnerability, as we already talked about, and the need to have a strong Jewish military to protect the Jewish future and the Jewish state. And so I think, what you're saying is really important, to be able to distinguish between having military power, having an army that can protect you, and then how the army is used, and in what way having a strong military can be used in a country that is a light unto the nations, and how political leadership matters in a way that might not reflect so well on the legacy that she was trying to build for Israel. So I mean, I thank you for, I know you're outspoken on these issues and a real leader, and I know how passionate you are, and I think it's great for other people to be able to hear that from you for sure. So, okay, I'm taking a question from the chat into another question that of course I have to ask. And just for people who are listening, Shaul and I were having lunch in, I think, March in Tel Aviv. And I said something about how inspired I was by Golda's feminism. And he looked at me, she was not a feminist. How dare you? He didn't say that, Terry, but the reaction was so immediate. And I said, I know she didn't identify with the feminist movement, but when I think about what feminism means to me and what we as, contemporary women think about feminism, it's women being in positions of power, having a seat at the table, being equal, right? And being able to, of course, have control over our bodies and our lives and our employment and stuff like that. And so, of course, it's so difficult to think of her not as a feminist, but she did not hide her kind of disagreement with political feminism. A friend of mine that I was talking to this morning said she broke the glass ceiling. She did not burn her bra. So, I think, given your visceral reaction to my comment.
No, I know. I just meant that she was not part of the radical feminist movement, and she was not identifying with them, and not burning bras. And she thought that was silly, but I think she can be some kind of a feminist icon or feminist model, at least, seeing her as equal to any other person or any male, or she had no qualms or no, she saw herself as equal to them, and also fought for some feminist causes like labor laws that protects women, or so on and so forth. And there is this story that is often told about a discussion. I think it was in the early 60s. One of the ministers, there was some, I don't know how to describe it exactly, but there were many instances of aggressive attacks on women, rapes in Israel in a certain period, I don't know. And so somebody in the government said, okay, we should have a curfew and women should stay home, I don't know, from 8 o'clock and not go out. So she said, no, if you want to have curfew, it should be on men and not on women. So that was one example. And she also, in 55, she was heading the Mapai party in Tel Aviv for mayorship. And it wasn't a personal elections. You were not electing a person, but a party. And she was heading the Mapai party for the mayorship of Tel Aviv. And the party that gets the most votes, the leader of the party is the mayor. And she got the most votes. First time a Labour Party is successful in winning the Tel Aviv mayorship. But the religious parties in the Tel Aviv council or some or conference, or they opposed her. So even though she won the election, they would not support her, and that's how she ended up not being elected as a mayor. But she got the most votes.
Why would they support her?
The religious party did not support a woman to be a mayor in Tel Aviv in 55. And she was, she was lecturing them as, she gave a speech when she attacked them very fiercely. She said, in a world where Hannah Senesh can be
Fighter.
You can go to Europe in the middle of the war and try to save Jews from the Nazis. You're telling me that I cannot be a mayor in Tel Aviv. So that was another episode, the feminist episode of her, but there were more. But it's true that she didn't think that radical feminist movement is doing any good. I don't know if it's wrong or right, but that was so I was reacting to this, not to her.
I know. It just is funny because it's true. You were right. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
She didn't like the word, but it's, it just, the connotation of the word, means different. Attributing a label that she didn't identify with. So,
okay. I want to tell another story about my
Please.
grandma. When she was in Africa during her years as foreign minister, she went to many Independence Days to celebrate the first Independence Day of various sub-Saharan African countries. And she went to, I'm not sure what country it was, but she went, and then they had a trip. They put all the leaders, they had a day trip to one of the falls in Rhodesia, and where they're trying to cross they were driving in a bus. They were going in a bus with many African leaders and herself, and maybe many other leaders from other countries. They're driving to these falls, and reached the border with Rhodesia, which was an apartheid state, at the time. And when they reached the border, the guards at the border asked all the black leaders to get out of the bus. So she said, if they are going down, I'm going with them. So she went off the bus with them and didn't go. And she was very conscious also about racial discrimination and so on and so forth. And also as a prime minister, also was supporting, and even Nelson Mandela in his first years as an activist, he was sentenced. Also, I'm not sure about the exact details of the story, but as a foreign minister, she said that Israel should support Nelson Mandela before he went to prison, when he was still active as a
She was a trailblazer on so many issues that are of such importance to the Zionist community, and it's so inspiring. And truly, to whatever extent we can help advance her legacy, and I know that's what you're doing. And I'm going to come back to it. I'm going to ask one more question. That's a two-part question, because I'm going to combine my question with a question from the chat, and then we'll let you go. This is such a fun one. There's a very famous quote, and so many things you've said, and again, there are quotes that we know that she said, or we think she said, we hope she said, because they're great quotes, and we quote her on them as though they're true. There's a quote that I think a lot of people have heard many times that is in the movie, and Guy Nativ has spoken about how it is true, and it wasn't always so clear that it was, that during the Yom Kippur War, Henry Kissinger went to Israel, and he said, he was sitting at her kitchen table, and he said, I want you to know that I'm here first as an American, second as Secretary of State, and third as a Jew. And she said, Henry, in Israel, we read from right to left. And again, that's a quote we've heard many times, but according to Guy Nativ, Liev Schreiber did go and meet with Kissinger before actually doing the role, and Kissinger did confirm that happened, that interaction happened. And so, and the question in the chat was about a famous story. I don't actually know the story of Golda's interaction with Anwar Sadat when he came to Jerusalem, and the person asking the question asked if you could provide any inside story on that. So, to whatever extent you're able, tell us a little bit about her relationships with Henry Kissinger and with Anwar Sadat, two major players, of course, in the history of Israel's relationship with the Arab world, and Israel's security in the region, especially during and after the Yom Kippur War?
Yeah, I think Kissinger was a national security advisor for Nixon up until September 73, I think. And sometime in late 72, the Arab-Israeli portfolio, Nixon decided to move it from the State Department and have Kissinger deal with the Arab-Israeli conflict. And my grandmother found Kissinger to be very reliable. He was Jewish, of course. And once he had in his hands, things went smoother in terms of Israeli-American relations. When William Rogers, I don't know if you know the name, but he was the foreign minister. He was the Secretary of State at the time. He had a very tense relations with Israel and with Golda. No, on a personal level, they had a very fine relations, but in terms of his ideas about how the conflict should be ended, there were many disagreements with him. But once Kissinger took this portfolio to his hands, he conducted it in a very smart way and devised many other opportunities to have relations or to jumpstart the negotiations, or to start, or to even to try and bring new ideas to the tables and try to get Egyptians and Israelis together to the table. It was not successful, but he was successful in gaining my grandmother's trust. That was very important to her. And they established very good relations, I think, not without problems. There were many quarrels between them, and she was tough negotiator, and I think she trusted him, and she thought that. Let me say that when he was of course. He stayed after her, of course. She left in 74, and he stayed after her as Secretary of State up until 76, and dealt with the Rabin government over the disengagement or the Sinai Agreement, the second Sinai Agreement of 75. And when you read his comments about the Rabin government and the Golda government, you see the differences. He said Golda was tough but honorable. Unlike Rabin, he was wrong about Rabin, but never mind. He was wrong about him. He misjudged him. He misjudged his weakness as being a chiseler, but it was not chiseler, of course. Rabin was very honorable, but he was a weak prime minister, so he could not deliver. Golda was tough but could deliver. So they had a very they trusted each other. He admired her, I think.
Yeah, they had mutual respect.
Yeah, he talks of her in discussions he has with his associates, with his. He frequently talks about Golda in nostalgic ways. I wish. In one instance, he says, "I don't believe that I miss her and Diane." So they had a very, I think it could be said that they had a good relationship, a working relationship, and trusted each other. And she also when he was here with his wife and Nancy, I think her name. So, and he was visiting here Israel, and he had to go to Damascus, so Nancy stayed here, and my grandmother invited her for dinner, and so she had a very good relationship with him, also on a personal level. And with Sadat, it's another story, but I think he also appreciated her way of conducting business in politics and in international relations. He trusted her word. And you see it in the movie when they meet. It's a very lovely meeting, I think.
Yeah.
It's a very,
Yeah.
it's not hostile.
No, it's very warm.
Yeah, and he also, I think he missed Golda when he was dealing with other Israeli politicians. And yeah, and as I said in his letter to Yitzhak Navon, to the Israeli president after she died, he credited her as one of the prominent leaders of Israel, and credit her with starting the peace process. And so he also, I think, thought of her as a worthy rival or adversary.
And you can make peace with someone that you don't trust and doesn't have political courage and, willing to take risks. And so I think the respect that she garnered from the people that she had to work with is the reason why she was so successful. And it's so frustrating that her legacy doesn't always recognize the successes. So I hope the film and your work helps to revitalize her legacy. And I'm going to just plug again to please look up the Golda Meir Leadership Institute and Shaul's leadership of it. And again, we are working on a bunch of different things to help build up the Institute and to ensure that her legacy is protected in Israel as well, and that people understand, her trailblazing impact as a female leader. There still have not been, nearly enough women leaders. And I know the Leadership Institute is thinking a lot about how to build up women leaders, political, social, civic leaders, and doing that in her name is such a privilege. So if you can support it, please do. Shaul, thank you.
Also, I want to recommend you to get this book. That's her autobiography. It's a wonderful book, really. I'm biased, but it is a beautiful book. It's written beautifully, and it just came in a paperback.
Right.
This lady, so you can have it. And if you want to know more about Golda, that's the best way to know about her, to learn about her. It's a beautiful book, and you'll find many stories better told than what I did here. I mean, she's a very good storyteller, and that's that good.
But it's amazing to hear it from you, truly. I mean, it's incredible to hear about your experience and how hard you and your family work. We met your cousin recently to talk also about the work that he does, and that all of you are working so hard to ensure that people understand the impact that she had and the things that she's accused of that she never did. And I wonder sometimes whether only a woman leader would actually be willing to take the fall for other people's mistakes. And, the fact that she resigned and Diane didn't, and, I mean, just so many things that she kind of took to the grave, and maybe you knew, but until all of this recent information was declassified, the rest of us didn't. So the film, I think, does a really great job with that. And I think, I've heard from people who say it doesn't, that they still feel like she's getting the sort of short end of the stick. And I think when you think about how Israelis think of her versus how Americans think of her, if you're American, it's easy to think that she is kind of taking too much blame. But if you're Israeli and your perception of her is so negative, you see the film and you see that actually you're wrong to have that perception.
Right.
And, so just for people who haven't seen it yet.
But I wonder if she were a male, and not a woman. I'm not sure she would be, criticized as much. I'm pretty sure she wouldn't. I mean, I think part of the criticism is because she's she's a woman. If she were a man, a male leader, I don't think she would be criticized as much.
Of course. I mean, when you look at the other people who were in the cabinet and in the defense establishment during Yom Kippur, who made mistakes, I would say much larger than hers, who never had to face the sort of consequences and repercussions of those actions the same way that she did, I think you know the answer to whether it was because she was a woman. Her humility, even in the face of that, is, I don't even know if it's admirable, but it's interesting. Anyway, her legacy is critical. I feel so much pride that she was a Jewish leader and not, a different leader, that kind of we get to claim her as someone who represented our values in such profound ways in life. And so I just want to thank you so much.
Sure, it's a pleasure.
A little nervous, but I promised you it would just be a conversation between us, and I've loved having this conversation with you, and I know that everyone else loved hearing from you. Just a quick reminder and plug for people who are on the Zoom still. Tonight, we have our Zioness new and returning members event. If you care about the issues that Golda advocated for, Zionism and progressive values, please get involved with us. We are doing work that I hope she would be really proud of, and we would love to see you there tonight. And next Wednesday night, we have our How to Talk Like a Zioness event. You can RSVP to either of these events at zioness.org/events, get the Zoom information and join us, and we will turn you into Lionesses and Zionesses very quickly. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Shaul, you are amazing.
Thank you very much. And keep up the good work. You're doing great.
Thank you, as are you. And everyone who's here, you're going to get an email probably in the next few months about supporting the Leadership Institute. So we are thanking you in advance for that support.
Sure.
Thank you, Shaul. Laila Tov. Thank you for being
with us. Laila Tov. Good night. Thank you.